Welcome to CrikeyCon 2018, our fifth one. I'll introduce myself very quickly. My name is Alcorn, one of the co-founders of this conference, along with Glenn. About 5 years ago, Glenn and I had a beer and we thought to ourselves, we're having a conversation around what we could do, what's a big thing that we could do. And we basically spoke at the same time. We both spoke at the same time. Glenn said, let's start a conference. And I said, let's invest in Bitcoin. But you've probably noticed that we didn't invest in Bitcoin by the absence of Lamborghinis in the car park. But we've put on a good conference. It's growing every year. We've now got 500 plus, no, just under 500 tickets sold. So we've grown massively since last year. One of the best things about today, and one of the best things that Glenn and I can do on your behalf, and a massive thanks to our sponsors, is make donations to charities. And I'll run through those in a moment, but I also want to point out that we've got a bit of an ethos here where we don't have sponsors jumping out at you. There's no vendor hall, as you've seen. You don't have sponsors lurking around, or salespeople lurking around corners jumping out at you. And we turn away sponsors based on this because they demand more from the conference. They want a sales booth, they want people here. So we've actually turned away money. So what it does is it actually shows how good the sponsors we've got actually are. So they're happy to have a passive landing of your eyeballs on their banners and the like. So we're really stoked to have them. So let me jump into last year's donations and the charities in which we were able to, on your behalf, make donations to. And this is probably the bit that we're most proud of as far as the conference goes. Last year we were able to donate $4,000 to Act for Kids, a charity providing therapy and support services to families who've experienced or are at risk of experiencing child abuse or neglect. We were able to donate $3,000 to aunties and uncles, a mentoring program for socially and isolated children, 1 to 11. And we're able to donate $4,000 to Western Suburbs Special School, an educational program for supporting kids with special needs to get them to ideally reach their optimal, or rather their potential. And the last one there, we were able to donate $4,000, thanks to our sponsors again, and you all for coming along, to the Women's Community Aid Associate, a women's house that works with women who have experienced domestic, or rather just experienced violence. Now, for those of you who are keeping score at home, that's a grand total of $15,000 that we're able to donate on your behalf. So thank you very much. I'm stoked to let you know we've got a fantastic speaker lineup today. We're really excited about it. Some of them have been doing this for a long time. Some of them, it'll probably be their first time up here. So please, if you think they're doing a good job, let them know. It doesn't hurt. Just make sure they know that you enjoyed their presentation and all the effort they've put into it. As I mentioned, our vendors are very soft sell. They're not jumping out at you. So I want to thank firstly our two gold sponsors, AusCert and Privasec. And AusCert have been around with us now for 4 years or 5 years. So thanks, guys. We really appreciate your continuing support. Some of the good guys on the internet. So thank you very much. We've got a whole heap of silver sponsors as well. We've got Ladbrokes, Human Eyes, Yell IT, Interlock, Red Hat, Interlock. So they're our silver sponsors. And thank you all for jumping in. I know as far as return of investment goes for a lot of these organizations, it's the return for them is the feel-good factor of supporting a conference like ours. So we want to say massive thanks to them. And CoreSec as well. And we've got a series of logo sponsors also. Red Hat, Wilson Kent Consulting, the Australian Cybersecurity Growth Network, University of New South Wales, Assurance, QGCIO, and CheckSec as well. So we're stoked. There's an interesting spread there. Thanks for those of you in the government and education that are supporting us as well. Today's put together by a lot of unpaid volunteers, and they're unsung heroes. They're getting out and about, and you'll see them. They're not paid. They're actually put in a lot of their spare time. We've got people doing back-end, even administration to keep the ATO happy. We've got across the board, the visible ones and the less visible ones. And they really are the unsung heroes. They come out with these ideas that you see around the place that are just fantastic. They spend copious time around meeting rooms discussing and for you all, devouring heaps of pizza. So we just want to say thanks to them. And if you see them, please give them a high five to say thank you. So today's all about you. And we really, really value your feedback. In the previous years, we've had feedback from you saying different things. One year you gave us feedback that the coffee was too hard to get, so we brought in coffee carts. Last year, we've also got some feedback around that some of you want to bring kids along to watch the presentations and to learn. So we've asked our speakers to keep it kid-friendly. If you have suggestions, please let us know. We're really keen. We operate this on a low budget, but we're really keen to get it so you guys get the most out of it. Now, we've had a series of MCs for today. Usually Patrick Gray MCs our day, but he's got his priorities a little bit wrong. And unfortunately, Darren Pauly as well has dropped out. But really our first choice, our ideal choice, has actually stepped up. So we're stoked to have Scotty Brown, and I'm going to pass over to Scotty right now. So please thank Scotty.
So that's a pretty solid intro, Wade. Third string MC. Nothing but A grade here at Crikey. Look, I think probably the one thing Wade didn't mention was all the volunteers that have helped us out. Thanks again. But they've got the blue lanyards today. So if you do get stuck or want to ask a question or you know something's going on, find someone with a blue lanyard and they'll help you out. So we usually try and start the day off with a pretty solid keynote. Each year, as Wade mentioned, we get more people turning up, so hopefully we're doing something right, and I don't think today's any exception because we're starting off with Gunter from Microsoft. So he's been around the security traps. Go check his LinkedIn. He's been doing a lot of stuff for a lot longer than most of us have been doing it. I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on as well is we've got a mix of people in the room today, red, blue, somewhere in between, people that haven't decided. And his talk is really pitched at the cloud, which is kind of relevant to all of us now, whether we like it or not, but from all of those different angles. So I'm going to get off stage and welcome Gunter, please.
Okay, so let me get this started then. So thanks everyone for welcoming here. It's been a little bit of a flight, so I think I'm still partially awake. Can you hear me okay? Okay, no, there we go. Okay, so doubling down on speakers. So I'm going to talk about basically cloud effects on security professionals. So, since everyone here is professional, budding professionals, or sort of grumpy old men like me in security, I'm just going to really sort of explain where I think a lot of the security is going, but focusing on the cloud security in particular. I seem to have a bit of a trouble with the mics and that. Maybe if I just plug into this one. You can, yeah, I'll do that one. Okay, so a little bit about me, just to kick things off. Maybe. Nope, it's not working. Okay, click. Okay. Okay, this is going to be interesting. Right, so quickly about me. So I've been involved in getting paid to do information security for 3 decades now, and along that time I've worn multiple hats, right? So I've done the CISO bit. That sucked. Wasn't very good at that, right? All this policy stuff, didn't really work for me. Been an analyst. I've run R&D teams. I was lucky enough to work with many of the folks here, like Glenn and that, for running internet security systems and X-Force along the way. I've been a pen tester, been a hacker, consultant for way too long. I sort of summarize for many people asking what I've done in the past. I sort of say I spent two decades trying to be a better bad guy than the bad guys, and then another decade trying to stop people like me from getting inside networks. and I've also been running engineering teams and strategists, but today, if you like, and purposely the magic hat that I have to wear is the CTO. So I'm a CTO for security inside Microsoft's Cloud and Enterprise division. So if you're not familiar with Microsoft, the way it's broken down, there are 4 major divisions of Microsoft, and there's a long tail of other things. So the 4 major divisions being Microsoft Windows, Office 365, Azure, and then entertainment, which includes Xbox and TV channels and then the long tail of everything else, right? So, click, okay. So to get everyone sort of up to speed in that, what is public cloud? So I'm going to be talking about cloud and cloud effects, just to make sure that everyone gets into this right sort of theme. So Gartner sort of defines, if you like, public cloud, in particular the IaaS, so infrastructure as a service. So it's the most, it's still the most used part of the cloud today. They define it as scalable and elastic IT-enabled capabilities delivered as a service using internet technologies. Quite a mouthful, but what it really means to me is, IaaS just parallel, is the parallel corollary of the traditional data center, right? And so when I look at customers that use Azure or AWS, the vast majority of the systems that they've set up and the way that they're moving to the cloud is as an IaaS. So they're effectively just taking their software, their traditional methods of running their business, and shifting it onto someone else's servers, right? But when I look at the cloud space, it's also a little bit different. So if here's the magic quadrants and that, and it's interesting from a Gartner perspective is that this is the 2017 one, and when you read the notes, they've been producing this particular magic quadrant for a number of years, but last year they had to change the scale because the leaders in this area are just so much far ahead, right? And so from the leader's perspective, there are a few key things that differentiate, if you like, the IaaS and into the public cloud that we have to deal with. So that being hyperscalable, fully elastic, PaaS, so platform as a service, software as a service, serverless, and building all the security as part of the security fabric going forward. So, whoops, missed one. Can I go back? Can we go back one? Ta-da! Okay, and so just a little one. So my job is effectively try to get Microsoft from there to that part, right, to get up to that particular corner there. But I have to do it from the security side, and as it sort of stands, and I'll cover a little bit in this presentation, security has really, really changed in the way that customers use the cloud today. Okay, so click through, next one. So to get everyone up to the same sort of speed, so when I talk about, and I'll be using a lot of different sort of acronyms and sort of tying these things through, I think it's really easy to understand for folks that don't understand yet about the differences on the cloud. So one easy method is if I look at the technology stack and I compare it to pizza. Okay, so on-premise, pizza. So if I look at the technology stack from running your own service, we range from the application, the data, the runtime, right down to the storage and the networking. And the parallels on the pizza side are, I want to start with the cheese, I want to stop with the toppings, the tomato sauce, I want to have the pizza dough, then I want to have the methods of cooking, and then the methods of actually eating in this. And so there's these sort of nice easy parallels. Click. Okay. And so what do these things sort of change? When I start talking about infrastructure as a service, in many ways you can sort of think of this as frozen pizza. Okay, so you've got this pizza, all the key pieces that are there, but now that you're providing the cooking mechanism and the dining experience, right? And then we go on to the platform as a service, the software as a service, right? And so in which case, we're gradually moving up the stack, and so more and more of the activities that relate to the creation of the pizza and the dining experience now shift into the cloud itself, right? Click. And one new area, which I think bears a lot of discussion really, is serverless. So it's a newer area as far as public cloud technologies go, but effectively what we're sort of saying here is that what's the next step beyond a SaaS service, so software as a service, and serverless is. And if I try to tie that back to the to the pizza analogy, what's happening with the serverless is effectively we're adding the orchestration automation there, right? And so that you have absolutely no visibility and no control over everything below that particular stack. And on the pizza side, you can sort of imagine that not only are you going out for dining for pizza, but we're going to supply the taxi and the concierge service to make sure you get there on time. Click. So if that's sort of like the big framework of public cloud and how public cloud sort of exists today, I think diving deeper into the security element is critical here. So what makes public cloud more secure? First of all, I think one of the most interesting pieces is that even going back 3 years, maybe 5 years tops, if you had a look at all the security mechanisms for a Fortune 100 company and all the security technologies that were in existence to protect their most senior executives, right, and the tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that those organizations would spend every year on those technologies. What's different is that now all of those technologies, all those core technologies, are inside the public cloud, right, and they're part of the security fabric, and just about all of them are free, right. So that fundamentally changes over a period of 3 to 5 years. That elite technology is just now there built into the cloud itself. Another key piece is that instrumentation and logging. Cloud is big. Wait until you see the data volumes, right? So everything, everywhere is logged. Everything, right? At the network level, at the host level, and everything in between, and even outside of that. So data volumes are huge. The key part from a security perspective, and this is where a lot of the primary mechanisms on the research side for public cloud and in particular Azure is really focused on intelligence. Okay, the scale of the data and the scale of the threats that are associated with the cloud are so big that we have to actually remove the humans from this framework. Click. So what do I sort of mean by intelligence, right? So today, if I take a little slice of, just if you like, an on-premise and normal organization, or an organization that has, a few workloads in the cloud, is their organization sort of sitting there. Everything today is interconnected, right? So there is telemetry from one device and one technology to the next. There's logging that goes on between these parts, and there's logic and automation that goes between these things. So multi-factor authentication, the device logs in, for example, through to the phishing aspects and all the data in that. So all of these parts are all generating data, but the key part for is moving from data into intelligence. And click. So when I start looking at the cloud, what happens is that instead of me just focusing on one particular organization, I now have all the organizations in that particular cloud. So the scale of and the data volumes are huge. So instead of talking about data lakes, I'm now talking about data oceans, all the data, all the time. Okay. Also have to start worrying about things like, especially for Europe and now for the US, GDPR, right? So no longer, I can accumulate all these logs and all this particular data. Now I have to have more rigor and controls over how long I retain data, what type of data I hold, and ensure that I can track all that data wherever it is inside the organization to be able to delete and release it as I go ahead. Today, trillions of streaming events, right? And because the volume of data is so huge and it's happening in real time, really the focus and the energy is going into machine intelligence, right? And I sort of differentiate between machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? To me, the artificial intelligence is very much about the neural networks. How can I replicate a human being, right? What's happening in machine intelligence is much more, if you like, the robotics. Instead of trying to, if you like, why do I need to build and design a smart android to go around and clean the house when Roomba will do fine, right? So create the minimum technology, the smart enough technology to solve that particular problem and sort of move on. Click. So the cloud effect, okay, with all of that data and all the intelligence, and I'll talk a little bit about how that intelligence kind of comes together, it has fundamentally changed the security paradigm. Okay, and what I mean by the security paradigm means that there is literally, from an attacker's perspective and from the defender's side, there is literally no place to hide inside the clouds. Okay. So our old analogy was, as a defender, you had to look after all your defenses all the time. You had to be correct all the time. Meanwhile, the attacker just needed one fault, one slip up, one vulnerability to get in, and then it was game over. From the cloud side, it works the other way. Okay, there's a little bit of we're going to assume that the bad guys get in at some particular point. However, the bad guys or the attackers have to remain silent inside that network all the time. Okay. Even one errant ping for a server from one device that's never communicated to another is enough to start changing risk scores and changing the anomaly detection side and start escalating the focus and the tracking of a particular new device or new operations there. And so that means that the defenders only need one fault to trigger and start their particular process. Okay. Click. From a public provider, in particular from the Azure side, I think one of the key things is that the security is not just about for customers that move to the cloud and the security that they have available to them. Security is actually fundamentally important to the cloud provider itself in two ways. So one is obviously someone like Microsoft is using Azure and the cloud for its own particular businesses. But what it also means is that, frankly, when a customer gets attacked and gets popped or whatever, the headline basically sort of reads that XYZ Corporation was hacked and they were on Azure or they're running Office 365 or something like that. And so by association, people start saying, well, maybe Microsoft is not secure. And so what that means is that a lot of the new technologies and focus is actually on how does the cloud provider on Azure actually go out of the way to secure the end user and the customer even more than how they would traditionally use security technologies. And so today the largest use of AI and machine learning is actually in the cloud for security. And I think to get an idea of just sort of the data volumes and things, if you take something, an event as simple as a failed logon, it's effectively almost to start a Boolean, right? Did that login succeed or fail? One or two different choices. The reality is the volume of data that gets generated from this. So if you like, the Active Directory server is going to generate a few bytes of data in a particular log event. You've got the targeted server generating new data, new logs. You have the targeted service that's generating logs, the packet capture that goes with this particular event, and so on and so on. So something that may have been a 2-byte action may actually have 20 to 50 kilobytes of log entries associated, distributed throughout the network. What that also means, though, is they have a lot of different systems that touch those logs and are analyzing those logs continuously, looking for anomalies, and then associating these different logs to arrive at different types of risk scores and to elevate and to prioritize different types of security technologies that are in place. Click. From a defender's perspective, it's really interesting. So, like I said, I've 20 plus years in security consultancy, and focused on attack side primarily. And 10 years ago, up to 10 years ago, whenever someone said they're on the defender side, the general reaction from most pen testers would be, okay, well, I guess you're a failed pen tester, right? You didn't quite understand security enough. If you were a defender, what that meant was you make sure the antivirus is installed, and make sure that you patch things, and you make sure that the agents are installed. And a very downward-looking sort of perspective from that side. It may not be entirely fair. Frankly, 10 years ago, the tools that the defenders had really, really sucked as well, right? If they wanted to go mining for data, understand things, they had to sift through logs and try to drive their own particular scripts. And then you have these problems that an organization says, we need to get better on security. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an IDS, and we're going to add DLP, and we're going to add some new host-based agents and that. Meanwhile, that security team of 2 people now have 6 different particular jobs, and so each of those technologies received only 5% of their time. So even though they had technologies, they were failing on that side. Okay. In many ways, that 10 years ago, the defender was a janitorial role, right? Okay, let's go fix the stuff that was already broken, just make sure we're clean, sweep the halls, and then we'll wait for the next break-in, right? Defenders today are completely different. Okay, so when I look at the Microsoft side, if you are top of your game in security, and you've been 20 plus years, 30 plus years in penetration testing, reverse engineering, on that, you're on the defender side. Okay, so fundamental change in the way that security is actioned, fundamental change in the way the type of people that are doing these defensive roles, and the technologies have also fundamentally changed. So for example, when we look at from Microsoft side, we have a number of different sort of programs. So for example, a program called One Hunt, which effectively means that for a period of 2 weeks, the entire organization, all of the red teams, all the blue teams, green teams, purple teams, all this stuff, everywhere are all working on trying to break all of Microsoft across the time. Anyway, gloves are off, break everything, and try to get in, right? And so you have the red teams and blue teams and purple teams inside the organization continually working, right? And so the defenders are continually developing new systems. And I made mention of a team called like the green team. So what that means from Microsoft's side is that you have your traditional blue team, that's your defense. The blue team is typically focused on how can I detect threats and mitigate these particular threats. The green team is effectively their engineers, right? So when I'm talking about cloud scale, to sort of say I need to mine this particular data set and find these types of things, let's pass that out to dedicated security engineering team to develop those tools and develop those mechanisms and going forward. So different types of defense that come forward through. It also means it's the very latest tools and the very latest technologies. But having said that, because of the scale that's involved, what it also means is that the skill level has had to jump up many stages, but more the rote jobs, the rote jobs like the janitorial, the cleanups and things are now machines. Okay, so for example, you go to Microsoft and there are no tier 1 security analysts. They don't exist. They literally have been replaced by scripts, okay? And that's happening to the tier 2 now as well, right? And I'll come back to that point, but to really understand that from the days of amateur defense have gone for the cloud. Click. Another way of sort of looking at this in another perspective is that in the past, if you were the defender, you had a small little shell around it, that's hard shell I'm going to defend, but effectively it was, as a defender, it was me against the rest of the internet, right? I was outnumbered by the attackers and the bad guys. Now today, when we look at the cloud, it's completely different. Okay, first of all, the defenders actually outnumber the attackers, right? They're better tooled, they're better trained, but not only that, as individual defense teams, what it also has is that because they're operating inside the public cloud, they have access to many more technologies that are already in place, that are already existing and working for them, on their behalf, that they no longer have to manage. And then in case like Azure, then we also have a separate defense team and SOC teams that then help support those organizations as well. So again, this is an elevation of skill set, but also fundamentally changing the roles of defenders. And defenders are, because of the levels of collaboration and the tooling, are much better prepared than the attackers sort of going forward. So click. As the cloud sort of changes, it also means that the role of security professionals is also fundamentally changing as well. Okay, so just as I mentioned at the start, that infrastructure as a service is very much is probably the closest approximation to the traditional on-premise security. Okay, so that means that your operating system, your infrastructure, and the application and the data are actually managed by your organization or managed by MSSP. As organizations transition to service, so for example, onto a SaaS operation, the number of things, right? That's changes. That means that the role of the vendor and the incident responder inside the organization or as a professional service support for that customer fundamentally changes as well. Okay. Things get a little bit even stranger when we start talking about serverless. We're still a good 5 to 8 years away from ubiquitous serverless services. But at that point, effectively, everything has been outsourced. Even pretty much all of the code that the customer actually uses at that point. Today, though, the biggest weakness for public cloud and the biggest source of vulnerabilities from if wearing my Microsoft hat is my biggest problem with the cloud security is the customers themselves. So as customers come on board, they introduce new vulnerabilities through their own code and through their own applications, right? And so again, what that means that for me when I look at the strategy side and the way that what has to change is that Microsoft itself has to go even further of securing the customer so the customer can't harm themselves going forward. Click. Now, I mean, how many in the room here are pen testers? A few, okay. And how many in the room are more from the incident response side? Okay, actually, there's more incident responders than pen testers, so I might be right on my conclusions. CTF on the other side, okay. So one of the interesting things is as we talk about PaaS, SaaS, and serverless, is that much of the activities that are being logged and are being logged ubiquitously there. However, those logs are about the services and service components that Microsoft owns and operates on multiple customers' side. So when it comes to things like an incident response, so a customer may have a system that are being popped for some reason, and they need to do some forensics and incident response against this particular incident. What's happening though is that as they've moved up this ladder, it means that their access to their logs and their data has decreased. Right? And it becomes much more complex for trying to get more details from Microsoft or a cloud provider of what's happening under the covers of these particular applications and these services. Right? And so what that means in many ways is that the cloud providers now have to do the incident response. And as customers move from a SaaS service to serverless, then it is inevitable that the IR profession at that point transitions almost exclusively into the public cloud provider. Right? So there's big changes there. Other sort of things, continual vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, red team, and all this. So all those sort of things that, if you had 100 customers and they're running their own particular infrastructure and their own particular companies and their own hosting facilities, meant that there was 100 different opportunities for different pen testers and different red teams and different jobs to be done. When those 100 companies are inside the cloud, right, and depending on the services that they're using, then Microsoft, in this case, has to provide all that pen testing, the continual scanning, the continual VA, and all these particular pieces. Because the compliance pieces, if you imagine that much of that code is now Microsoft's code sitting below what the customer can ever touch, still needs to be assessed, still needs to be certified, still needs to be audited, and so therefore Microsoft must provide those types of services. So again, this transition of external entities that were focused on the customer and their environments forces the cloud providers to provide those services in-house and through their own particular teams. And again, so from the vulnerability side, when I look at when systems are being popped and vulnerabilities, there's probably, I would say probably 95% probability that the reason the customer got popped was because they misconfigured a server and set a bad password, and the remaining 5% is because of code flaws inside their actual applications. Click. So those security obligations are being inherited by the cloud. So what does that mean for in-house customer security teams? So those in-house security teams are moving from security to compliance and auditing, right? So they're required to get those compliance and those audit documents from the service providers, from the cloud providers themselves. They're focused much more on managing access and permissions of the users that actually go into that particular space as opposed to the code itself. What does that mean for external security consulting companies? Well, the scope of assessment, the scope of the penetration testing, that becomes much narrower, okay, and much less frequent. Greater focus on the code. So again, given that the primary vector for compromise of customers in the cloud is through their own code, therefore, that's where the opportunities continue for pen testers and reverse engineers and let's just really focus on that area. The other area, frankly, is I sort of use the quote of, go where no tool has gone before. Okay. From the cloud side, anything in particular problem that I need to focus on, I need to focus on something that will operate at tremendous scale and will continue to scale forevermore, right? Which means I'm focused on the automation side. And so, if it can't be automated, then then there's the human intellect can come into that space. Click. Having said that, and this is always a fun one here, is are you an artist? Okay, what does that mean? So, like from my perspective, on trying to protect the cloud, especially at scale, there's a few different things. Is there a methodology? If there's a methodology, then a tool can be built. Okay, if a tool can be built, it should and can be automated. If it can be automated, then frankly, why can't the AI just learn and do it automatically? Okay, so and so what's left, things that can't be part of a methodology, can't be done by a tool, and can't be done by by machine learning or an AI, therefore is art, right? So how many here feel like they're artists? Okay, a few. So one of the questions that comes up, especially on the penetration testing, is like, you know, I've heard it many times running many different penetration testing teams around the world, is, 80% of the stuff I do is tools, and the 20% is me, my magic, sort of thing. Okay, now if that tools and all that, automation is now happening in the clouds, that means that you are 100% magic, right? But have you ever tried to explain to a customer, sort of, when the customer sort of says, so it's all magic, right? So does that mean that if I ask you to do this test today, and you do these findings, and if I ask you to do this test again next week, are you going to find exactly the same things, or are you going to find different things? Either way you answer that, you're going to lose this customer, right? So click. So what does it mean for a future for security professionals? Okay, so I will frankly state is that the cutting edge of security is happening in the clouds by the cloud providers, right? It's something, like in the Gartner Magic Quadrant there, or the Gartner slide there, there are quite a few, public cloud providers, but the folks that are getting into that, Magic Quadrant and above are, deeply, deeply invested in security, right? So from the Microsoft side and in the division I'm with, the enterprise and security, and cloud and enterprise security, we're talking about, thousands of security engineers, and hundreds and hundreds of internal pen testers, red teamers, green teamers, purple teamers, and things like this, right? And so the scale is there. So it's the place to be working on new types of security, but it also means that there's some really cool things. So it means that engineers and the teams have to solve those 1 in a million, 1 in a billion events, right? So how many people have been using their machine, their laptop or whatever, it does something weird, and so you reboot, and you're happy with that, right? And as long as it doesn't happen to you too many times, you don't care about it, right? From my side, if that event is 1 in a million, means that I have to deal with it 5,000 times a day, right? So if it's 5,000 times a day, it's probably worthwhile me putting 3 or 4 engineers to figure out what the hell's going on, right? What that also means, though, is that from putting a professional hat on, if you want to work on some of the, from an engineering perspective, you want to work on some of the hardest, toughest security problems that are happening in the clouds today. Cool, exciting, right? What also means, though, is the cloud is the target, right? As everyone moves to the cloud, all the data goes to the clouds, that means that, here's the big red target on the cloud providers, right? The bigger the cloud provider, the bigger the target they actually are. It doesn't worry me, right? The reason for it is, as I explained, the amount of tooling, the amount of technologies and being able to invest, at all the different layers are there for a reason, right? And not only that is, I have big budgets and big needs to ensure that those security technologies are more advanced and continue to advance. And the defenders team are continually trained and continually working on this particular part. So what it also means is that, again, the volume of people, the number of people that are on the defense and the tooling that they have has never existed before, right? And next year I can say the same thing again, and the year after that I can probably say the same thing again. And that these teams and the cloud providers' security defenses are increasing faster than the attackers. What also means is that defenders today outnumber the attackers. That includes any government team, military team you want to pick out today. If you want to pick, North Korea, China, or even the US, Azure, AWS, the security teams and defenders are bigger and better trained. Okay. And luckily, what it also means is that for organized crime, I made this comment last night, and that's we used to worry about script kiddies or messing around sort of things. From my side, from the cloud, script kiddies don't enter into anything. There's nothing that a script kiddie can do against the cloud that has any of interest to it. Now, the customers, using crappy passwords and not using multi-factor authentication and things like that, well, okay, there's a hole there. The other side of this is really that having said all that security and all those layers there, that means that we also have to extend security down to the individual user. Okay, and so what that means to me is, yes, you can have an admin that goes in there and says, you know what, I just want to, I know I shouldn't, but I'm going to make this. I'm going to allow the RDP ports on this particular web service open, and I'm going to give it a quick password because I only need it for 15 minutes, right? Okay, so a lot of the technologies that we're developing are focused on how do I prevent, either alert or prevent those types of actions going forward. Click. one I like. One of the areas that I hate is threat hunting. So having looked at the incident response side, threat hunting has sort of come to the fore over the last 5 years, right? As a profession. In many ways, from my perspective, and happy to argue later on this, I'm happy to sort of see it disappear. The old paradigm is being perpetuated by the threat hunting teams. They were based on assuming that breaches were rare. The paradigm today is I'm going to just assume breaches happen. And I'm going to assume that a breach is already existing inside the network somewhere, and this is just going to be my mode of actions going forward. What that also means is that I have to move from traditional tools of, okay, let's dump all the logs over here, okay, and then I'll throw a few people at that and say, on Friday we're going to go hunting through this particular data and see if there's anything interesting, and we'll sort of work back from that. In the last couple of years, people sort of move from cold logs to warm logs. So, okay, I want these things to happen, and then any priority alerts, I now want to get those priority alerts, and I start mining these particular things. Where things need to be, and where the things are going in the cloud, is that this needs to be happening in real time. So I need to be able to get ahead of the attacker. So while the attack is in operation, I need to be able to detect it and project where they're actually going and stop it before it gets to critical services. But it also changes a few things. Traditionally, from a threat hunter's perspective, it was, I'm looking for a needle in the haystack. From the cloud side, I have a haystack of needles. Okay, and so there's no shortage of things that are broken that customers have done or whatever, and there's no shortage of security flaws that are out there. The job is to prioritize all of those needles and clean them up as fast as possible. Right? One of my pet mantras as well is, given that we're talking about big data and oceans of data and better tools and AI, and that my real mission is to, and my desire is to remove the word alert from our vocabulary as security professionals. What alert means to me is that something bad has happened already, and I'm going to flag something to you, and the alert basically says, this happened, I don't know what to do, go figure it out. What I want to see is effectively a log entry saying, I've corrected these 5 things, everything's okay, right? And sort of move on. Click. So what does that mean for the next generation of security professionals? Okay, so this worries me an awful lot, and if it doesn't worry you yet, then it should be, I think so. So first of all, when I started on the penetration testing side, every newbie and professional as a pen tester or even on incident response started off by running vulnerability scanners, ran Nmap, and their job was to make sure that they ran all the tests against all the IP addresses and then correlated the results and removed false positives. That's how you started in this profession, right? And once you got good at that, you started working up the ways of developing better reports and things like that, right? From a defender's side, what you used to do was you used to sift through all those alerts. If someone send you, here's the pen test reports, here are all the event logs and that, and again, you'd be removing false positives and patching systems. Those jobs don't exist, and so they certainly don't exist inside the cloud and from the cloud customer side. Okay, so if you're in these particular fields and you want to sort of move up to, as your career sort of grows, generally for the way the career ladder works is that for you to move up, someone needs to move in behind you, right, and carry on those particular jobs. Otherwise, you will be continuing be the master of a particular job for the rest of your life, right? Some people might like that. I don't think most people do, though. And so, we need to think of new ways of overcoming this hurdle of how to get new people into information security in this particular area, but more importantly, at a level that they can actually contribute now, because the AIs, the machines, the tooling, and the automation have removed many of these starter professions. And another aspect of that is sort of think of it again is that as we want to as professionals move up this career ladder, today we're actually removing this parts of the ladder as we're going up, right? And so that gap is actually getting bigger and bigger. Okay. And so when I sort of look forward, or trying to project on this for where do people sort of get started, in that there are a few professions that I think have a limited life sort of going forward. So penetration testing, threat hunting, and first and second line security support and defense. From a cloud perspective, have pretty much already disappeared. And as companies move more into the cloud and also move from an IaaS to PaaS and onto serverless, become even less relevant. So what does that really mean? What that means is that for newbies, what are if I look at who as a cloud provider in security, what type of people am I trying to hire at the graduate level, right? The folks that I need to hire are people that are in product management. How do you manage teams and the skill sets that go of how to manage dysfunctional engineers, right? And bring those sort of things together there. Security architects. So the number one job, most high-paid security job in the US today is for cloud security architects, right? That's changing. So today a lot of those cloud security architects are, how do I take my existing monolithic application and things and move it to the cloud? And what will happen is that as organizations have already transitioned to the cloud, they'll be much more focused on how do I now move up the ladder from PaaS to SaaS to serverless, and how all the tooling that sort of goes around there, sort of ongoing. And business analysts seem to be another key area, right? So quite different, and it's also a little bit scary from some background. If you've spent a long time in information security, to see that the starting slope to information security of the new types of jobs that are coming in are things that we may have looked down on for many years ago. Cool. Click. So with that, hopefully, I wanted to as a keynote and sort of kick things off, try to give you a feel for how things are actually changing, where the cloud is actually sort of going, what that fundamentally means to these, to organizations, to your customers or your own organizations. But also there are a whole lot of unanswered questions, right? I don't have any answers there. I'm trying to work on many of those answers, and by all means, I'm going to be around for the rest of the day, and then if you want to talk more about these sort of areas, if you've got some cool ideas on how to solve these sort of things, love to hear from you. Excellent. Thank you very much.
We've got a couple of minutes.